Today we're going to talk about the Twilight Zone. Not that Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone in the ocean. Okay? So if you remember, the ocean is made up of four zones: the Sunlight Zone, Twilight Zone, Midnight Zone, and Trench Zone. Okay? So the ocean Twilight Zone, if you remember about how the sun sets, twilight is when the sun is setting, so there isn't much sun left. So just very little sunlight gets there. It's very cold and it's dark. There's a lot of pressure. Okay. So the ocean twilight zone is a layer of water that stretches around the globe. It lies about 200 to 1,000 meters, which is about 650 feet to 3,300 feet below the ocean surface, just beyond the reach of sunlight. The twilight zone is cold and dim, but it has some bioluminescence, which is a light produced by living organisms. It does have a lot of life in there, believe it or not. Um, Studies suggest that biomass of fish in the twilight zone may be actually 10 times greater than previously thought. That's more than in all the rest of the ocean combined. So that's a lot of creatures that live in there. So the animals that are in the twilight zone range from microscopic to some of the biggest on the planet, which is kind of creepy if you think about how dark and spooky it is down there. What lies beneath? So some of the stop. Um, so some organisms spend their lives in the twilight zone, and then some of them travel up to the surface. We had talked about the viperfish does that. Some of the whales do that. Um, because they live in the dark, but then they hunt at night. Um, Animals in the twilight zone support the ocean's food web, and they transport amounts of carbon from the surface waters into the ocean. So that helps to regulate the global climate. So so far, the twilight zone is largely unexplored, and it's remained mostly beyond the reach of commercial fishing. Um, some of the fishing interests are poised to begin extracting biological resources from the twilight zone, but this has unknown consequences, so it might not be such a good idea. So the kinds of organisms that live in the twilight zone include microscopic bacteria and tiny animals known as zooplankton, along with larger crustaceans, fish, squid, and many kinds of gelatinous animals. Gelatinous means jelly, gooey, smushy animals. With their strange shapes and behaviors, many of the Twilight Zone's inhabitants seem like the stuff of fantasy or science fiction. But, here's this word again, they're all uniquely adapted to life in deep, dark, watery world where temperatures stay close to freezing and water pressure can reach 1,500 pounds per inch. That's a lot. So most fish in this area are only about a few inches long, but their size doesn't keep them from being a powerful force. The bristlemouth, a small twilight zone fish with a large jaw full of spiny teeth, is the most abundant vertebrae on Earth, possibly numbering in the quadrillions. And because this is vastly unexplored, there's countless of other species down there. So to survive in such a low light environment, these species, from the tiny, tiny microbes to the jellyfish, produce their own light through a biochemical process known as bioluminescence to avoid being eaten and to attract prey. For example, some fish use an adaptation called counter illumination to keep from being seen by potential predators. Since light in the twilight zone comes from above, many predators look up to search for prey silhouetted against the surface. Consequently, some small prey fish have rows of organs called photophores along their bellies that emit light similar in intensity and color to the light of the surface water above, making them invisible when viewed from below. That is a cool adaptation. So if you remember, sharks and dolphins have kind of white, lighter bellies, and then their tops are dark. And that's so that they can glide along the ocean, the top of the ocean, without really being seen. So these fish that live in the dark develops an adaptation that makes their bellies look like sunlight as well. So they're invisible. That's pretty cool. Conversely, predatory fish can also use bioluminescence in their case to attract prey to catch and eat. For example, some, for example, have bioluminescent organ called an esca that dangles from a whisker-like barbell on their chins or backs like a fishing lure. They have this little thing right here that like lights up and it's like, hey, fishy, 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 come see what this is. And then they get eaten. So some Twilight Zone animals do migrate. During World War II, U.S. Navy sonar operators looking for enemy submarines were puzzled when sonar images seemed to show the seafloor changing its depth from about a quarter-mile down during the day to near the surface after dark. What appeared to be a shifting seafloor turned out to be plankton, fish, and other Twilight Zone animals making a nightly migration to and from the surface to find food. Not all organisms in the Twilight Zone migrate, but many do. As darkness falls, a multitude of fish, squid, plankton, and other mid-ocean dwellers swim hundreds or thousands of feet up to the surface waters to feed under the cover of darkness, then return to the relative safety of the deeper, darker waters at daybreak to avoid becoming food themselves. Theirs is the largest animal migration on planet, and it happens every 24 hours. Isn't that awesome? So, like I said, they hang out in the Twilight Zone during the day, doing their thing, and then at night, when the sunlight zone is dark, they come up and they hunt for the things that like the sun. So, the Twilight Zone is important because of the ocean food webs. So, the abundance of life in the Twilight Zone supports a complex food web with connections to both deep ocean and the surface. Dead animals on marine snow, clumps of dead plankton, bacteria, poop, and other particles rich in organic carbon sink from the surface waters through the Twilight Zone to the deep ocean, providing food for Twilight Zone animals. Some Twilight Zone inhabitants migrate to the surface to feed every night and then return to deeper waters. Conversely, satellite tagging has revealed that whales, tuna, swordfish, sharks, and other top predators dive deep down into the Twilight Zone to feed. Since humans value those predators for their ecological, commercial, and nutritional benefits, we also depend on the Twilight Zone. So the Twilight Zone helps to keep the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. This is really cool. So the ocean absorbs about a quarter of the carbon dioxide that human activities emit into the atmosphere. The Twilight Zone plays an important role in transferring carbon from surface water to the deep ocean, preventing it from returning to the air as heat-trapping greenhouse gases. The multi-step process is called the ocean's biological pump. In surface waters where there's plenty of light, tiny plant-like organisms called photoplankton use energy from the sun to transform carbon dioxide into energy and matter that allows them to grow. Phytoplankton, in return, become food for small animals known as zooplankton, which are then eaten by other fish and animals. So, these phytoplankton eat the carbon dioxide out of the ocean, which then they are in turn eaten by zooplankton, which then are eaten by smaller fish, which are eaten by bigger fish, and so on and so forth. So it's important that none of these parts of the web get disturbed so that it can help to scrub our air that we pollute. Some of the carbon in the surface waters becomes part of an underwater blizzard known as marine snow. That snow, however, consists of clumps of dead plankton, bacteria, poop, and other particles, which then becomes food. Um, Another fast track for carbon into deeper water is through the daily migration of Twilight Zone animals that feed near the surface at night, then bring the carbon in their food back down to the Twilight Zone during the day. About 90% of the carbon that gets into the Twilight Zone remains there, but a small percentage of it sinks down to the deep ocean when animals die or expel carbon-rich fecal matter. That's poop. Once there, it can remain isolated from the atmosphere for hundreds or thousands of years. So that's pretty awesome. We don't know much about everything in the Twilight Zone because it's so dark and deep and so much pressure that humans really can't go down there without special equipment. So some of the things that they still want to know about the Twilight Zone are its biomass and biodiversity. So that means what is down there, what kind of species, how many, how long do they live, how quickly are they growing, when do they reproduce, um, how how often do large ocean predators such as whales and tunas um, use the Twilight Zone for food? How much carbon does the Twilight Zone animals transfer to the deep ocean? How much carbon sinks? So it's pretty interesting. The ocean is one of the few places in the world that hasn't been explored as much um, because it's so vast and deep. So let's look at a couple of the cool animals that are in Twilight Zone, eating our carbon emissions. So this guy is an elongated bristlemouth fish. They're the most common fish in the Twilight Zone. Look at his teeth. That is crazy business. Do you see how he's dark and he's got a little bit of like the bioluminescence on his belly? This guy is a lanternfish, so he has the counter illumination to blend into the environment. They also use that for communication. This guy is the viperfish. He's one of the ones that migrates up and down. Look at that tooth right there. Good Lord. Stuff out of nightmares. See how everything's cloudy? This is an octopus. See how you can see through him? He's translucent, which is something that's indicative of the Twilight Zone. This guy, this is the Phronemia bug. They said it's the creature that inspired the movie Alien. It really does look like a face hugger, doesn't it? For those of you who've never seen Alien, trust me, it looks like a face hugger. This guy is a jellyfish, a helmet jellyfish. Do you see how he's translucent? It's a dragonfish. Look at his jaw. Wow. This guy is another lanternfish. This is an Atlantic moonfish. This is a sea angel. Again, it's translucent, and it looks like an angel. There's its little wings and its little halo. This is a Lophius. It's a glass squid. It's translucent. Kind of does look like glass. It's a Twilight Zone squid. Look at its dots. What's this guy? The Twilight Zone shrimp. He's got translucent parts. So that's some of the critters of the Twilight Zone. So the Twilight Zone's very important for our environment, and it's not very much explored. The animals in there are kind of freaky, but really cool. Hope you enjoyed it.